Welcome to the A.R. Bernard Show, where we explore the intersection of faith and culture. I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. Thanks for joining us. Today, I'm joined by my esteemed colleague and friend, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik. Together, we co-host the Rev and the Rabbi Show on WABC Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Yeah, I'm plugging it, absolutely. He's the son of Holocaust survivors, the executive vice president of the New York Board of Rabbis, and he was one of the first religious leaders on the scene at Ground Zero on 9/11. A thought leader, author, he is a tireless advocate for civil discourse, and, as he puts it, finding unity in the midst of diversity. There's no denying that this has been a trying time for Jewish people all over the world. Earlier this year, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, stated the American Jewish community is facing a threat level that's now unprecedented in modern history. As one of the leaders of the largest Jewish population of any city in the world, Rabbi Potasnik is acutely aware of the challenges for what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating and heartfelt conversation. Please welcome my dear friend, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
Thank you, Reverend Bernard. Firstly, let me say I am most grateful, and the word grateful is inadequate, to express my love and respect for you. As you mentioned, I'm a child of survivors, but I'm also an only child of those survivors. They lost their children, they lost their families during the Holocaust. So I've always watched with envy brothers and sisters, although I have to confess to you, I've met a lot of brothers and sisters over the years who've envied me as an only child. But you have been that brother. And we've enjoyed a relationship for so many years, but a relationship that is not superficial, a relationship where we can talk to each other professionally and personally, discuss challenges, celebrations. It's all that you want in a relationship. So you are someone who, in my life, is paramount. I thank you for that.
Well, Rabbi, thank you for those words of affirmation, and I will say ditto. You have been a friend and a brother, and we've walked through personal things, challenges over the last 25 years of our relationship, and I think that's part of what it's going to take for interfaith dialogue and cooperation. And we're going to get to that because you have to create personal relationships in order for it to work. But before we go there, let's talk about the state of religion in our nation. Pew Research has done a few studies, and of course they've come up with new terms, the unaffiliated, the nones, the disaffiliated, and the terms continue. And really they're looking at the fact that people today are detaching themselves from their faith. And I don't think it's from faith in general, because they're now talking about spirituality. I think it's detaching themselves from organized, established religion. What is your take on these studies and the state of affairs?
Rev, someone came back from Israel and was asked by a reporter, how was it in one word? He said, good. The reporter asked, how was it in 2 words? He said, not good. And I think if you look at the state of affairs today, in some places it's good, in other places it's not good. You mentioned the unaffiliated. Unaffiliated means they're totally disconnected, and as you said, from organized religion, but they're looking for something and finding something elsewhere that is not being offered under conventional settings. So the question becomes, so what is it they're not finding and still seeking? Because I think they're searching for something. Mm-hmm. I think all of us need something in our lives. We want to wake up in the morning with a feeling of self-validation, that we matter, that we mean something, we're contributing to the betterment of society. And when you're totally removed, what do you have? Who do you talk to? What's your community? So there are those who are finding communities elsewhere in the political arena, in social justice platforms, but they're not finding it in that usual setting of organized religion. And yet others are.
But that doesn't satisfy. We are spiritual beings because there are aspects of our humanity that transcend the empirical, the visible, the material, what we can touch and see and hear and smell and taste. Hope, love, meaning, purpose. So even though they may get involved in community activity that gives them a sense of short-term purpose and meaning, it doesn't satisfy that inner need for the transcendent.
Yeah. Someone said to me that he went to a congregation, happened to be a Jewish congregation. He said, I sat there and I was a spectator. I wasn't a participant. When I go to a sporting event, I'm a spectator. But when I walk into a house of worship, I want more. I want to feel that I matter in that house of worship, that I'm contributing to what's going on, that it's a reciprocal relationship. So I think we have to re-examine what we're not doing in capturing the hearts and minds of people who really want to be there, but they find they're not getting that fulfillment. They're not feeling satisfied, and they look for it elsewhere. And when you look for it elsewhere, that becomes very problematic for many of us, because sometimes they find it in the wrong places. I remember years ago, there was a discussion with a rabbi and a member of the Jews for Jesus. And the rabbi said, look, we are very offended by this Jews for Jesus, because what you're doing is you're trying to synthesize two things that really don't belong together from a theological view. And then he looked at the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I think what else bothers you is that some of those kids are your kids. They came from your congregation. They didn't find it there. They're finding it with us. So I think it's a real re-examination of why we're not getting it some places, but we're getting people in other places.
But it also speaks to American culture, because we are a celebrity-obsessed society, but we're also a novelty-obsessed society. So when you have those conditions within the culture, people get tired of things very quickly, and they're always looking for the new or the next thing. And I think that's affecting congregations, whether it's Jewish, Christian, Muslim, that's a reality that we're faced. So is it that we need to reconsider how we deliver? Because you and I know that we're people of the book. The scriptures
not
are
Facebook.
Eternal.
People
no, not that book, not that book. But the scriptures are eternal. They're always relevant. The principles are timeless. So maybe it's how it's being presented. I've heard, Catholics say, well, I don't go to the church unless I'm going to get a good homily. And the Eucharist is central to Catholicism, but they're still looking for a good sermon, a good message, a good homily. Do you find that true in Judaism?
Yeah, look, there are people who are saying, I don't need the clergy to regurgitate the New York Times or other newspapers to me. I need to tell them, what does my tradition say about what's perhaps in the New York Times and other places? Talk to me about the wisdom within the faith. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us to look at our books of learning that offer so much, and to say, what can I tell them that they haven't read in all of these secular publications? What is it that is enriching here that they need to know? And I think when you have that sermon, because look, when we were growing up, I remember going to churches and synagogues, sitting in the last row and listening to preachers. I love that. I remember Rabbi Lookstein. I remember Forbes, right? Jim Forbes at Riverside Church, and I would say, wow. And even though he wasn't preaching my tradition, there were pearls there that I could extract and place into my tradition. Lookstein, a genius, would take, commentaries and interweave them into the issues of the day. And I walked away and I said, that's good. And of course you prayed. So you have that combination of learning, listening, and also experiencing the beauty of your faith.
But what you said is important. And that's why I love, and that's what this program is about, the intersection of faith and culture, because they do intersect. You said that you heard the interweaving of what's happening in society at this time with Scripture. And I think that's what they're looking for. They use the word relevance. We want our faith to be relevant, which means that we want it to be practical. We want to be able to apply it on a day-to-day basis in our regular lives. But we also want it to give us an understanding of what's happening in the world around us. Whether it's, and we'll talk about October 7th, those kind of conflicts and tensions, but what's happening socially, politically, morally, spiritually within the society. We have a term in our New Testament that we call signs of the times, which is simply putting a scriptural lens on the trends, issues, and narratives that are informing and driving the social, spiritual, moral, and political landscape of the day. And they want to know, how does my faith relate to what's going on?
You know, I had mentioned to you some time ago that in 2023, the most popular word, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, was authentic. People were looking, Googling authentic. What does authentic mean? And I think that is key in what we're talking about. People, young people in particular, want authenticity. They respect authenticity. They know who's phony, you know, and who's legitimate. So I think when we look at our text, we have to say, what's the authentic message here? What's the real message? Not something that is contrived, not something that, you know, you want to try to satisfy them with the flavor of the day, but something that's more lasting. And I think we have much to offer. That's the other thing. We don't have to be defensive about our faith traditions. You know, we're proud of them. I always say I love meeting a proud Christian as I do meeting a proud Jew, because I like people who stand up for what they believe, you know, who practice, you know, what they're learning and what they're listening to, what's being preached. We have much to offer, and we don't have to shy away from that. And I think some people don't have that kind of extra commitment to say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and it's not always popular. You know, you got to be very careful. Popular and principled. If this is your principle, don't worry about whether it's popular. People respect you more when you respect yourself.
But isn't that why you and I have gotten along for 25 years? You keep
Well,
trying to convert
tolerant.
me, and I keep trying to convert you. It's not working. But the reality is that because we are rooted and grounded in our own faith tradition, we can have very important conversations. We can disagree with each other without being disagreeable, because we understand at the end of the day, it is what you described as interfaith. I love the way you said it. Interfaith requires interfaith.
Yeah.
There has to be your own inner conviction and settlement within your own faith tradition in order to have dialogue, meaningful dialogue, with those of other traditions.
If I want to talk to you about any issue that is important for me and I want to know your tradition, I better be prepared in my tradition. Because how can I have, you know, issues put on the table if I'm not really proficient in what my tradition teaches me? One of the great experiences I have in our relationship is you call me on the phone and you say, I'm looking at this text in Genesis or in the prophets, whatever. What does your tradition say about it? And I say, my God, my parents looking down and saying, what a great country you live in, that you have a Christian, you know, pastor calling you to ask, what do the Jews think about this in their tradition? And the same thing, I can look at you and I say, what is this sentence here? You know, that's true interfaith dialogue, not duologue, we're both talking at the same time, but dialogue where we're talking and listening to each other. So yeah, you better be prepared for a serious discussion, but you better be prepared to know what your tradition says before you start questioning another tradition.
Saint Anselm said, and I love this because it really speaks to me personally, I think you'll enjoy this. He said that theology is faith-seeking understanding. When we think of theology, the study of God, number one, how do you study God? How does the finite study the infinite, right? So we can't understand it as though we're trying to figure God out, but it's trying to understand our belief system, understand our traditions, our doctrines, and how we apply them to the real world on a daily basis. Because even we as Christians, and I'm sure you experience this in the Jewish tradition, we live in a tension between doctrine and practice. How do we take what we believe and apply it? And sometimes it's quite difficult It's nuanced. It's not as black and white as we would like it to be.
My father was in retail. I guess all of us are in retail to some extent.
Especially in these days.
Right? My father was in retail, and I remember he had this grocery business. Next to the scale, he had a Bible. And the Bible was open to the directive, the commandment about having just weights. Mm-hmm. He said it was always a reminder to him that when he served the public, make sure at the same time you're serving your God. So, he was able to have that vision, the book, the scale. And it was also saying when you go into the marketplace, when you go into that secular, bring the book with you.
Yeah.
Don't leave it behind.
Yeah.
So you don't have to somehow camouflage or discard temporarily who you are to satisfy some secular demand.
613 commandments in the law of Moses, precepts. And precepts are usually cut and dry. The stop sign means stop. We don't stop usually, but it means stop, right?
Full stop.
We don't have to explain that. But then you have the yield sign, which now requires wisdom, knowledge, understanding, experience, because it doesn't tell you who to yield to, what to yield, how long to yield. It doesn't fill in those blanks. That's what I use to describe principle, a broad and basic truth, which Scripture is mostly principle, because we live life mostly in the gray, not the black and white. So a principle is a broad and basic truth that we have to wrestle through in its application. For instance, and let's tackle something that you and I have talked about from time to time, and yet it's a hot button issue in the culture wars and even politically, because they're taking sides. The issue of abortion. You've got pro-life, you've got anti-abortion, you've got all this mix. In your faith tradition, it was interesting to me how you saw this, because you told me that a life in the womb is a potential life. Mm-hmm. See, in our tradition, and that's not universal amongst all Christians, but in my specific tradition and context of faith, life begins at the moment of conception and needs to be protected while in the womb, and I'll hold the pro-lifers accountable to this, and protected outside the womb. Mm-hmm. Because that's a problem when you put so much emphasis on the protection of a child in the womb, yet you do nothing to help that child once it's out in society and struggling, all right, to live within that society. So I want to see both together. But your point that it's a potential life, explain that.
I think sometimes when people hear the phrase potential life, they minimize it. Well, it's not that important, then you can do whatever you want. That's not what our tradition teaches. It says potential life obviously is of immense value, but if you have to weigh it against the full life, if you have to make a decision, full life, life of the mother, life of the potential life, then you favor the actual life as far as the potential. But that doesn't give you the right to simply have abortion for any, superficial reason, although I have to be very careful when I say this. Over the years, I bet people who had abortions, it's never casual.
No.
It's never superficial. No. It's a very heart-wrenching, difficult decision to make, and I think sometimes people tend to minimize it when they have abortions. Don't minimize the pain, especially the emotional pain of someone going through that. But if you have to make a decision, you have potential life, you have actual life, now you have a little more flexibility, religious flexibility, in how you make a determination. You said something before I just want to touch on. You said it's what you do afterwards as well. One of the most important phrases in the Bible is the day after. What you do the day after reminds people of how sincere they were the day before. I remember Dick Gregory, a famous African-American comedian. We used to have what's called Brotherhood Day, Brotherhood Week. We used to exchange pulpits. And Gregory said, when I get invited into a home after Brotherhood Week, after Brotherhood Day, then I know they're really sincere about it. What you do afterwards tells me you really meant it the day before. So I think we're very good sometimes in the pre, not so good in the post. And you have to apply the same value to that life before and after, except we have this concept of potential life. But it doesn't give you the right to just be haphazard about it. It says, look, we respect potential life, but we have, we allow greater, not respect, but greater treatment of the full life if you have to come to that difficult decision of deciding.
And of course, that socially and politically divides our society, polarizes our society around these particular issues and how we look at it. And there are those who say, well, this is it. This is the perspective everyone should have and respect. And yet, life is nuanced. Rape, incest, the life of the mother involved. And I've spoken to women who have had abortions, and it's not casual. It's not minimized. Mm-hmm. It is a heart-wrenching experience for them to know that there was a life in them, and now to detach, whether it's because of concerns about the quality of life, because we have the quality of life versus the sanctity of life, but it is not an easy decision, and yet it's made to seem that way by those who are anti-abortion.
Yeah, very often a lot of men who are making that determination for women, calling it casual, like going to the, a beauty parlor or something. I think we have to be very careful when we impose our thoughts on those who are going through a very painful time. It's very easy to be, what they call them, sidewalk superintendents, where you stand on the sidewalk, you're watching a construction project, and you say, no, go this way. No, move it that way. And you're standing there,
yeah,
right? They're the ones who are going through it, and you're standing there. We have a lot of those kinds of, spectators, those in the bleachers who tell you exactly what's happening down below. And that also is something that religious tradition reminds us. Don't judge someone until you walk in that person's shoes,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You have to know what it is before you make that final evaluation, that judgment on the other person. But the fact that we have those differences doesn't mean that we have to battle with each other. I think religious history is replete with a lot of bloodshed because people just couldn't accept that there was a different teaching, there was a different view of an issue. Thankfully, we can say that in many parts of our world, there are still those who fight for the right to be different. And they don't destroy because there's difference. There's a wonderful Jewish tradition. When you walk into a room and you see a crowd there, you make a blessing. Thank you, God, for creating different faces and different minds, right? Mm-hmm. So we always recognize that someone has a right to, as you say, their wrong opinion, but someone has a right to a different opinion, and that doesn't mean you have to denigrate the person.
But that's a unity in diversity.
Yeah. Difference doesn't mean denigration.
Of which you speak, and that's important. And also speak to the fact, and you and I talk about this quite often, that religion brings a moral value consensus to society. It challenges us on a, not just a spiritual level, but on a moral level. It brings conviction, judgment to our actions. Are we thinking this through in terms of what we are doing within the context of society? Speaking of which, let's transition. October 7th. Where were you when you received the news of the bombing that took place in Israel by Hamas? And what was your initial reaction?
I remember getting a series of calls, one after the other. I believe you were one of them, the Cardinal was one of them, a number of Jewish friends said, have you heard what's happened? And of course, the first time I got the call, I hadn't heard. But when I did hear what happened, I said, my parents, having gone through what they went through, having lost family, having seen the horror of hate, I'm not sure they would want to be here, to see October 7th. I mentioned to you that phrase, never again, we thought had an exclamation mark after it. But when you hear of October 7th and the subsequent vicious vitriol that followed it, never again may have a question mark after it. So I think we as a people now are a people in pain. Walking here, and looking at the news that was posted, I see some of the demonstrations are fine. The demonstrators who seek to destroy the right of others to live, that's not fine. Israel, I'm a proud Zionist. I don't apologize or step back. Israel has a right to live as a Jewish people, something that was denied to us for many years. We can't accept living with someone who says, in my charter, I want to destroy you. That's written there. And in my life, I want to destroy you. We wouldn't accept that with anybody else. Just imagine you're an African American. I say to you, next door to you, we're going to put the Ku Klux Klan headquarters right next door. How would you feel about that? You wouldn't accept it. And we wouldn't accept it for someone else. So Jews say Hamas, funded by Iran, is not a peace partner. And by the way, we want to have peace. Because in our faith traditions, it's one of the highest values. We pray for peace, and we compromise for peace. As a matter of fact, the well-known custom in the synagogue is when you speak of peace, you have to take 3 steps back when you pray for peace. Because we know to get to a peaceful relationship, and anyone who's married or anybody in a relationship knows, you got to make compromises. It can't just be your way, because then it'll be no way. So October the 7th was a horrific day. Sadly, it's been followed by a lot of hate, and in places of so-called high alerting.
Let's go there. Let's talk about the fact that there have been, of course, here in New York City, demonstrations, protests at Columbia University. Some 40 universities across the country have joined in, and I'm not saying the university joined in, but they've become a part of the protest movement. What's your reaction to the protests that are going on?
Look, we all protested during civil rights movements, some during the Vietnam period. Protests are fully acceptable. As a matter of fact, we're proud of the fact that in America you have the right to agree and disagree. But when you are calling for the elimination of a people, when you have signs that say Hitler was right, globalize the Intifada, send the Jews back to Poland, kill the Jews, all of those, slogans that are so detestable, that's unacceptable. That's hate speech. In other words, you don't want me to live. That's what you're saying. And we have to fight back. What is shocking to many of us is that it's happening in places of learning, right? We didn't think this was going to happen on college campuses. Protests, yes, but not these vitriolic protests. And I've said to you many times, everybody talks about education being the answer, but the real answer is moral education. And that's where we play an important role. You got to have morality and education, because educated people did a lot of damage in the world. They built a lot of death camps and created a lot of laws that discriminate against people. In this country, we had discrimination, right? Blacks couldn't sit at the counter, couldn't go to the same places to drink water. And there were laws, right? There were laws that sanctioned that, written by educated people.
Yeah.
So just to say education is not enough. It has to have a lot more of that moral component. So I walked by Columbia a few times. I wanted to see what was going on. And I met some of the Jewish students, and some of them said to me, we removed the Jewish star. We didn't want the indicia of being Jewish. Some took off the yarmulke. When you can't walk on a campus safely because you're a Jew, what does that say about the condition of education in this country? We should not be at that place.
And our universities are supposed to be places for higher learning. This means an elevated discussion. And we can talk about our opinions, our feelings, our perspectives, but in a way that we don't resort to violence and attack with each other. Much of the protest is around how Israel is responding. And notice when I asked the question, I didn't say the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's the Israeli-Hamas conflict. And you and I have had this conversation. I've told you why. Because to insert the Palestinian people and make the conflict between the Palestinian people and Israel is to eliminate the problem that initiated October 7th. And that is a political entity, a very radical political entity that dominates, that particular portion of Israel. So speak to the fact that people are having a problem with how Israel is responding. At one point, some 30,000 Palestinian lives are lost. How do you respond to that?
No one with a conscience wants to see the loss of innocent life. Sadly, throughout history, whenever there are wars, innocent life is lost. The challenge is to try to minimize the innocent life. And I don't have an easy answer to what else Israel can do, because one of the things you can't do is when people call for this ceasefire, and by the way, we haven't even spoken about hostages. When people talk about ceasefire, what does that mean? Does that mean we go back to October 6th when you're vulnerable again to an October 7th? All right? Or are we saying, of course we want to have a ceasefire, but you also have to have release of hostages and the removal of Hamas? Because you can't live with someone. Golda Meir used to say, how do you negotiate with a terrorist? What are the terms of the discussion? What time are you going to come to kill me? You want to be flexible on that, but you want to kill me. And I think the other part of it is, we know, or we should know, that part of the solution comes in finding a place for the Palestinians. You can't close your eyes. Someone said, with those who close their eyes never see tears. You can't close your eyes to the pain of people. And during Passover, when we fill a cup with wine, we have that tradition where we take a few drops when we recite the plagues and we diminish the wine from the cup, because Egyptians lost their lives. And even though they were adversaries, they lost their lives. And, it is saying we value all human life, even those who are adversaries. But here you have those who say, we want to kill you. And by the way, one of the things we've learned in life, when someone says, I want to kill you, they mean it. Don't
believe them, right?
Yeah, believe it. Don't try to contextualize. That's a big word today, contextualize, or put it in context. If I want to kill you, they want to kill you. But we also have to find a way out of this morass. And I think what's missing is the hate. With all of these signs with those hateful slogans, are not talking about a peaceful resolution. They're talking about the elimination of the Jewish people. They're talking about the elimination of a state of Israel. That we can't accept. And I said to you before, and others have said it, we can be pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel. We just have to find a way, come to the table, let's sit, let's make concessions, because again, you have to step back, you got to make concessions for peace. But where there's a willingness to find peace, you do it, as happened with Jordan, as happened with Egypt. But you have to have that willingness. If you don't have that, then we can't go forward. And I think with some of these college students, I don't see the depth of understanding of the pain of the Israeli side. It's like a one-sided view of life. And that, to me, is unacceptable, especially when you're a place of higher learning. And I think we have to have a real examination as to why in these colleges you have some of the things being taught that are so destructive, so willing to just destroy Jewish life. What's being taught in the curricula? Who are the professors being hired? Where is the money coming from? I think we have to look at that. But it's a very sobering moment.
And it seems to be an oversimplification of a problem that has its roots in history that goes back centuries, even thousands of years when it comes to the Jewish people. I am unapologetically in support of the nation of Israel, in support of the Jewish people. We've talked about that. It is a theological position that I hold in my faith tradition, which informs me, and also understanding Israel as a strategic ally for the United States in a Middle East where we're seeing the emergence of a Cold War. We haven't seen Cold War since the collapse of the Soviet Union. We understand as we look back to the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev, Kennedy, we saw how that is fought through proxy wars. But here we now have again in the Middle East the emergence of a Cold War. So I understand the importance of having a strategic ally between the United States, alliance between the United States and Israel. So I see it from a theological perspective based on Scripture. I see it from a strategic perspective based upon what's happening within the society. But I find that too many of those who are weighing in on this and protesting against Israel have a very short historical perspective on what's going on.
Yeah, I think if one looks back and says, if you look at Gaza, 2005, Israelis, left Gaza, left them with all of the improvements that have been made and said, now it's yours. You can do what you want. They destroyed all of that. And they voted for Hamas, and here we are today. So I think if you want to put fault on what's happening today, look at Hamas. Look at what they've done to your people. And also, what has to be emphasized is we have human hostages. We have people being held against their will. And in all of those signs I see, with the demonstrations at the college campuses, not one says free the hostages. When I go to the Israeli demonstrations for the hostages, no one holds up a sign that says kill the Palestinians. They say, I hear songs of peace, bring home the hostages. There is a real desire. As a matter of fact, as you know, many of the people who live down south near Gaza on the Israeli side, they were peaceniks. They lived there because they said, eventually we're going to have a relationship with the other side, so let's live here. They invited them. Many of them worked for them in their homes. So October 7th was it was a shocking, sobering moment. Says, wait a minute, we don't have a partner for peace. We have someone who just hates us so much, they'll do anything and everything to destroy us. And look at what they did October the 7th. Look at what they did to the children and the women. And by the way, we were so disheartened by the organizations that would speak up for the rights of women that were silent when that happened. The UN Commission on the Status of Women, silent. Why? Israeli women, Me Too, except for women, Jewish women. So it's a very painful time for us. As I said, we're a people in pain, but we're also a people of hope. We don't stop praying for peace. We don't stop, thinking about how we can get out of this, horrible situation and bring hope to people on both sides. We're not going to give up on that. My parents, I said to my father, how'd you survive going through that? He said, one word, tomorrow. I always thought, tomorrow, we're not going to be here. And he still believed in God before the Holocaust and after the Holocaust.
And you and I have spoken of the fact that in our faith traditions, we are prisoners of hope. So, Rabbi, let's talk about your experience as a child of Holocaust survivors. Did your parents talk much about their experience?
Firstly, thank you for allowing me to talk about two people who meant everything to me and went through so much. I remember when I had to prepare their memorial monument, I wrote, they loved each other and they loved tomorrow because they live for tomorrow. They did not talk about the Holocaust The one time I was able to get them to talk, and it led to a few discussions, but not many, was when I found pictures of young children at home in a drawer. And I said, "Who are these?" And, "Well, we'll tell you at some point." And then they finally admitted these were their children. They had died during the Holocaust. Between them, they lost 7 children. So I'm a product of that marriage, but those children come from their previous spouses who were lost as well. So they didn't want to impose the guilt on me, but they were also not reticent to say that it was very painful to live through that period without going into detail. Elie Wiesel said, in life, when you're born, you begin, but you have to learn sometimes how to begin again. And they began again. And I'm proud to be a product of that relationship, but I also have, I think, somewhat survivor's guilt. I always felt I had to do something for those children who were left behind. If I could just tell you a story you may know about, in the Talmud, Jewish commentary on the Torah, there's a question about 2 people being in the wilderness with 1 canteen of water. If both drink, both die. If one drinks, one survives, but the other dies. Who should drink from the canteen of water? And we have this debate. And finally, the consensus opinion is the person who owns the canteen has the right to drink because your life takes precedence. You have to save your own life first. All those others disagree, but that's the majority view. However, the person who drinks from the canteen knows that he or she has a responsibility to the one who couldn't drink from the canteen. So I've often felt that being a rabbi and being involved in the Jewish world was my way of perpetuating the lives of those who didn't drink from the canteen, because I was able to drink from the canteen. So it's always been with me. I remember, I think I once shared it with you, at my bar mitzvah when I became 13 years old, we have a party, and the party planner came over to my parents and said, "Look, give me the names of your family because we're going to light 13 candles tonight. So give me the family members." And my father looked at her and said, "We don't have 13 family members. We have maybe 3 or 4 who are here. We don't have 13. So we had friends coming up. And that's why I value our friendship. So it was a happy home, but you always knew
It was something.
there was
there.
something, yeah.
But you, I'm sure, you were curious. You wanted to know. You wanted to understand the experience that they had that they wouldn't talk about. So you studied the Holocaust. You read about it. How did your research affect you in understanding what they went through but were not willing to really talk about?
I remember when I visited Israel, I went to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial, Holocaust Remembrance. And I saw the names of the righteous Gentiles, the Christians who saved Jewish lives. And I thought to myself, what was it in them that inspired them to risk their lives, to rescue the lives of the Jews? And I always felt I owe them too. And I want to do something that perpetuates their memory. So the study of the Holocaust for me was also a study of responsibility for me, that I had to do something for those who couldn't be here anymore. I remember Abba Eban once said that the Israelis were able to win that War of Independence in 1948 because they had 6 million on their side. He was talking about the 6 million who were lost in the Holocaust. We've always carried that. That's why we have Holocaust remembrance. But it's not enough to just remember. We have to commit to doing something. So it's not just a matter of saying prayers and offering some comforting words. It's a matter of doing. Belief is measured by behavior. So we believe, in the beauty of who they were, but our behavior has to be such that we make sure that never again has an exclamation mark, not a question mark.
With that said, our culture, especially here in America, because we're not constitutionally a Christian nation, but we're undeniably Christian in culture and ceremony. So we memorialize things by giving holidays, making them national holidays. But also, we started the process of turning months into celebrations for specific occasions. So we have African American History Month in February. We have May as Jewish Heritage Month. Now, I've got a problem because why did we get the shorter month and you guys get the 31-day month? I'll have to work on that.
We're blamed for that, too.
Yeah, of course.
Add that to the list
Absolutely.
of things we're blamed for.
That.
Right.
But I think it's important, regardless of how long the month may be, that we do highlight individuals within American society and the challenges that we've had to participate fully in the social and political life of American society as African Americans and as Jewish people, because our histories are parallel. The marginalization that African Americans experienced was codified into law and systems and structures. The segregation that you experienced was more of a gentleman's agreement, yet was very real in terms of how you experienced it. But we have this month. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a very good thing, but I would expand it. I think it should be obligatory, or we should feel obligated to attend the month of the other. You and I were together at the Schoenberg Center in Harlem during Black History Month. And we walked in and the pictures of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman were on the wall, those who gave their lives in the civil rights movement. And I think when it comes to Jewish heritage, and we thankfully in this city, it's a very, very well-known celebration. We invite people of different faiths to stand with us, and you're certainly high on that list. So I think it is important because too many people don't know their history. Too many people minimize their history. They'll say, well, you're talking about something, you're old-fashioned. You're talking about yesterday. It's not today. And I think we need to know the pain of the past so we can have, more purpose in the present to make sure we don't go back. We have the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We now have the Chancellor of the City of New York, David Banks, is introducing a course on understanding Jewish identity, for example. You have to know what people went through to get to this place so you know how to relate more, how to do more with them in this place. So I think, Jewish heritage is good, but again, it's the day after. What happens after that month is over? What happens after Black History Month? Have we bettered relations with one another? So I think it's an opportunity to do more, only if we know that we can walk together with one another. I often thought there should be a museum in New York or anywhere to understand the respective histories. I want young people to walk in and to learn Black history, Jewish history, and Puerto Rican history or Hispanic history, whatever it is. You want to be informed because you can appreciate the other more when you understand the history of the other more. So we don't have to go to separate buildings at separate occasions. We should be able to walk in and just learn from that moment by listening to the voices of the past.
I've said it often that ignorance is the most violent element in human society. What we do out of ignorance. Dr. King, wonderful quote that he spoke, and he said, "There's nothing more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." And that's so real, because what people can do out of ignorance is deadly. So informing, educating. You and I have done panel discussions, town hall meetings, and we continue to do that. We work together on the Commission of Religious Leaders. And you, the Cardinal, and I, and hosts of other prominent religious leaders, to address issues, but bringing together our different faith traditions and perspectives and working together in collaboration. I've enjoyed it. I've learned so much from the exchange. It's a continuous education of what others are dealing with. And I think that you and I, and we've talked about this, and I'll take credit. We'll take credit. There is more interfaith dialogue in our city and in our state here in New York than we've ever seen. And I think that you and I can take responsibility for that because we understand the importance of it.
Yeah, and I think the dialogue didn't stop with just talking to each other, but being there with one another. So I know very well, over the years, when sadly there have been some hate attacks on houses of worship, we have stood together. I think back to Charlottesville, when neo-Nazis marched, said Jews will not replace us. A group of Christians formed that protective perimeter around a Jewish house of worship and said to those hate mongers, you want them? You got to go through us. And I think that has been the message we have sent, that anti-Semitism is anti-Christianity, is anti-Islam, and therefore it's not just a Jewish problem. We have to, stand in solidarity and protect one another. St. Patrick's Cathedral has been desecrated. There have been mosques that have been desecrated, synagogues desecrated, churches of different denominations. And yet we are there and saying, this is not just you who's been assaulted. This is us. This is an affront to our tradition as well. And I think it's very reassuring to people to know that you're not alone in a world where some people really hate you.
I like that statement. We're not alone. It changes the conversation. It changes how people interact with each other. You and I have done news shows talking about the other, respect for the other, understanding the other. And going back to your statement, unity in diversity, we're becoming more of a pluralistic society, ethnically, racially, and religiously. And that's a reality that we have to adapt and adjust to. And the only way we're going to survive as a nation is when we begin to appreciate the other, understand the other, sit down and have a conversation with the other, create safe spaces for dialogue, for debate, healthy debate, create personal relationships, educate and inform, especially our young people. I think that's what's going to change the trajectory of our nation and begin to build bridges and heal us of the deep divide and polarization.
I think back again, talking about my parents, my mom, whenever I would say to her, I'm coming home from college, and, whether it was a roommate or a friend, can I bring him home? Is it okay if I bring him home for the vacation? She said to me, Joe, there's always room for one more. And I've tried to live with that. There's room for one more at the table. There's room for one more in terms of having an expanded discussion. We have to find room for one more, especially when so many didn't have a place at the table. You talk of the Commission of Religious Leaders. What a great optic that is. Here we are sitting at one table, all different backgrounds and beliefs, but sitting together and looking at each other. As you said before, it's hard to demonize someone when you have a relationship, right? When you know the other person, you know what hurts the other person, you don't want to destroy the other person. And I think we have to expand. And thankfully, New York has become the prototype, the template for that model of interfaith relationships where we sit together and talk it out. And listening, what did we say? That God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth because listening is more important than speaking. But it's an opportunity to listen to each other as well. We don't have all the answers, but listening to each other, we can find more of the answers.
And isn't that what our faith tradition teaches us? Ours is rooted in the Old Testament. Our Christian tradition is rooted in the Old Testament.
Thank you.
And the words, "Hear, O Israel."
Yeah.
Hear.
You know,
listen.
Rosh Hashanah, the High Holy Day period, beginning with the New Year, someone gets up and sounds the shofar, the clarion call, and recites a prayer. Thank you, O God, for allowing me to listen to the shofar. Wait a minute, you're sounding it. You don't say to sound the shofar, you say to listen to the shofar. So yeah, you have to sound it, but more important, you better listen to what's being, because we tune out. I see people walking down the street with their phones, and I often think, let me stand right here. And I know that person's going to walk right into me because they're not listening to anybody else. They're listening, to whatever they're listening to. But we are able through technology, with all due respect to technology, we need it, to tune out other things. And some people just tune out everybody else and only listen to what's important to them. And I think we have to recognize there's a time to tune in and there's a time to tune out. But we, in the world of religion, what does religion mean in Latin?
To bind together.
To bind together?
Yeah, that's right.
That's what we'd have to do.
Yeah.
Stop being apart.
Rabbi, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure when we get together, no matter whether the context is a podcast like this, our radio show, WABC, doing town halls, panel discussions. It's always a pleasure to interact with you and champion the cause of building bridges and understanding.
We as Jews are expected to offer 100 praise of thanksgiving each day. So many praise for Thanksgiving. And I just want to say to you personally, for me it's 101, to say thank you. Thank you for being the brother that you are and have been. And I look forward to many more years of that relationship. We're willing to have it. We just need the other side.
The okay from above.
Yeah. We've negotiated 50% of the relationship. Let's hope for the other 50%.
Well, that's the end of another podcast right here on A.R. Bernard Show. And I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. Thank you for coming on the show today. And, of course, thank Rabbi Joseph Potasnik. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe. Share. We hope you'll join us for our next illuminating conversation right here on the A.R. Bernard Show. I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. Till next time, God bless.